The 19th of December, 2001, Buenos Aires, Argentina. It's a Thursday morning. People are lining up outside their banks, not to make a deposit, to beg for their own money back. A week earlier, the Argentine government had frozen every bank account in the country. They called it the corralito, the little fence. You could go to work, you could buy groceries, but you could not touch your savings, not a single peso. By nightfall, the streets of Buenos Aires looked like a war zone. People were banging pots and pans outside the presidential palace. 5 presidents resigned in 11 days. And by the time it was over, Argentina had defaulted on $100 billion in debt, the largest sovereign default in history at that point. But here's what nobody tells you. Some people came out of that crisis richer than they went in. And some people lost everything. The difference had nothing to do with luck. It had everything to do with what they did and when. I'm going to walk you through what actually happened inside Argentina week by week, on the ground. And at the end, I'm going to show you the exact 3 moves that separated the people who survived from the people who were wiped out. Because if you watched our last video about the dollar, what happened in Argentina is not ancient history. It's a live preview. To understand the collapse, you need to understand the trap Argentina walked into, because it didn't happen overnight. Through the 1990s, Argentina was celebrated as an economic miracle. The IMF praised it. Street loved it. The country had pegged its currency, the peso, to the US dollar. 1 peso equaled $1, no exceptions. This was called the convertibility plan, and for a while, it worked beautifully. Inflation vanished. Foreign investment flooded in. The middle class grew. But there was a fatal flaw baked into the system. Because when the dollar is strong, your currency is strong, even if your economy is weak. Argentine exports became too expensive. Their factories couldn't compete. Unemployment crept up. The government kept borrowing to cover the gap. And the debt grew and grew and grew. By 2001, Argentina owed more than it could ever realistically repay, and the world knew it. International lenders started pulling out. The peso, still officially equal to $1, was quietly becoming worthless in practice. And here's the thing. Ordinary Argentines could feel it, even if they didn't understand the economics. You could feel it the way you feel a storm before it arrives. Something was wrong. The question was, who acted on that feeling? And who waited? The people who survived Argentina 2001 all did something in common in the months before the crash. Something so simple it almost sounds obvious in hindsight, but almost nobody did it. I'll tell you what it was in a moment, but first, let me show you exactly how fast things fell apart. Week 1. The freeze. December 17, 2001. The government announced the corralito. Bank withdrawals were capped at $250 per week. Businesses couldn't access operating funds. People who had rent to pay, suppliers to pay, employees to pay suddenly couldn't. The economy seized up like an engine without oil. Week 2. The denial. December 8-14. The government insisted this was temporary. Trust the system, they said. Most people waited. They believed it would pass. This was the most expensive mistake they made, not the crash itself, but the 2 weeks of waiting and hoping while the window to act was still open. Week 3. The breaking point. December 15-21. Supermarkets were looted. Streets erupted. On December 20th, President de la Rua resigned and fled the presidential palace by helicopter, because the crowds below wouldn't let him leave any other way. Argentina had no functioning government, no president, no plan. Week 4. The default. December 22-31. Argentina officially defaulted on its debt. The peso was devalued. Overnight, anyone who had peso-denominated savings lost 70% of their purchasing power. 70% in a single policy announcement. People who had worked their entire lives to save money watched those savings become worth less than a third of what they were a month earlier. That's not a statistic. That's a family's college fund. That's a business owner's retirement. That's 20 years of sacrifice, gone in a week. So here's the part that actually matters. Because when economists went back and studied what happened, who lost everything and who didn't, 3 patterns emerged consistently. Move 1. They got out of local currency early. The people who survived had converted at least part of their peso savings into US dollars or physical assets months before the crash, not because they predicted it with certainty, but because they saw the warning signs and decided the cost of being wrong was low and the cost of being right and unprepared was catastrophic. The ones who waited for certainty waited too long. Move 2. They owned things, not just paper. Real estate held its value in dollar terms far better than bank accounts. People who owned a small apartment or a piece of land came through the crisis with their wealth mostly intact because physical assets can't be frozen, devalued by policy, or seized by a bank run. Paper can. Move 3. They had cash outside the banking system. This sounds extreme until you remember that banks literally locked people out of their own accounts. The families who had kept even a small emergency fund in physical cash at home, not in a bank, were the ones who could still buy food, pay for medicine, and keep their businesses running during the freeze. Not because they were paranoid, because they understood that a system built on trust can fail when trust fails. Argentina, 2001. Didn't happen because Argentines were stupid or reckless. It happened because they trusted a system that was quietly breaking, and by the time the break was visible to everyone, it was too late to act. The warning signs were there. The debt levels, the currency peg that didn't reflect economic reality. The government telling people everything was fine while quietly preparing emergency measures. Sound familiar? I'm not saying the US is Argentina. But I am saying that the people who came out of Argentina, weren't the ones who predicted the crash. They were the ones who decided not to bet everything on the assumption that things couldn't go wrong. The lesson from Argentina isn't fear, it's preparation. And preparation always costs less before a crisis than after one. If this gave you something to think about, subscribe, because next week we're going deeper. We're going to look at 3 countries right now that are showing the same early warning signs Argentina showed in 1999. You won't want to miss that one.